Hi guys, welcome to exception handling in Java session 3. In this session we are going to discuss throw keyword, throws keyword and throw versus throws, checked exception propagation, unchecked exception propagation, then what precautions we need to take care when we are overriding the methods, and custom exceptions, both checked and unchecked. These are the topics we are going to discuss as part of this session, guys. Let us see what is Java throw keyword. Generally, Java throw keyword is used to explicitly throw an exception, and mainly it is targeted for custom defined exceptions. But yes, you can use this for both API as well as for custom defined exceptions. You can throw either checked or unchecked exception in Java by throw keyword. The throw keyword is mainly used to throw custom exceptions. This is the syntax, guys. Just throw new exception class. Let me show you the demo here. I'm defining method, one static method, vote validate. I'm just defining one method, guys, where it will accept the age and it will check the age. If age is less than 18, then throw new arithmetic exception. Else eligible for what? This is simple logic, guys. Just I define one static method so that I'm not going to create the object to call this method from my main method. Just one method, vote validate. I'm passing the age. If age is less than 18, explicitly I'm throwing the exception here. Throw new arithmetic exception, or else they can continue as usual. Means he or she is eligible for voting. So let me call this method vote validate. Eligible for vote. Guys, better you handle the exception because you're throwing arithmetic exception. Where is my try catch? Just I wrapped this method inside of try block. This is the total code, guys. This is my total code. Suppose if I am passing this 12, yes, 12 is less than 18, the validate method will throw the exception. What is that exception? Arithmetic exception. And who is going to handle this is my main method. And remaining code will be executed. Let me execute this once again. So this is the way to throw the exception. So let me repeat once again, guys. Throw is mainly targeted for custom defined exceptions, but yes, we can use throw keyword for API defined exceptions as well as custom defined exceptions. Custom defined exceptions you are going to see at the end of this session, and this one is the example for throwing the API depend exceptions. That's all for throw keyword, guys. Let us see the exception propagation. Guys, I have M1 where it will throw the, I'm going to throw the exception explicitly, and M2 is the caller of M1. When M1 throws the exception explicitly, the caller has to handle it, or otherwise this caller M2 can pass that exception to caller of M2, that is M3, or M3 can handle it, or else M3 also can pass this exception object to main method. This is nothing but exception propagation or exception chaining. Both you can propagate checked exceptions and unchecked exceptions. First we will discuss the unchecked exception propagation, then we will move on to checked exception propagation. Let me repeat once again, guys. I have M1 where I am going to explicitly throw the unchecked exception, and I'm going to call M1 from M2. So M1 will pass that object exception object to M2. Ideally M2 has to handle it. If M2 is not handling, then it can pass that object to M3, because M3 is the caller of M2, or else M3 can handle it, or M3 also can pass that object to the main method. This is known as exception propagation or exception chaining. Few things related to Java, those keyword, we will see this later. It has M1, guys. I'm utilizing the same method. I'm going to define this as non-static void M2. What M2 does is just it is calling M1 by passing some integer parameter. Similarly, I'm defining M3. M3 will call M2, and we are calling M3 here. Just create a class object and test. This is what I showed you in the diagram, guys. See, I have M1 method where I am throwing the exception, arithmetic exception explicitly when age is less than 18, and I'm calling M1 from M2. Ideally M2 has to handle this arithmetic exception. If this is not handling, it will pass the same object to his caller. What is the caller of this? M3. M3 has to handle it. If M3 is not handling, then it can pass this object to main method. This is known as unchecked exception chaining or unchecked exception propagation. Let me execute this code. See, since we are handling this, it will go smooth. Let me pass this minority, and then it will throw the exception. since we are handling this, your rest of the code, your remaining code will execute smoothly. Guys, if you see this is known as stack trace. This is known as stack trace. Guys, it is very important in real-time applications to check this. How developers will check this is, developers will start from the bottom. They will check this. What is the class? Here test. What is the method? Main. What is the line number? Line number 18. Line number 80 is the one which is throwing the exception. Now go up. Test class M3 method line number 14. So actual culprit is not this one. This is just throwing the exception. Who handed this exception to M3 is line number 14. What is that? M2. How M2 is handed this to M3? Because M2 is calling M1. So line 5 is the actual culprit. Now see this, why line number 5 is the actual culprit? Because the code has written in such a way that if age is less than 18, throw a new arithmetic exception. You are explicitly throwing the exception. This way developer will come to know that what is the exact piece of code which is throwing the exception. This is called as stack trace, guys, which is very important in real-time applications for debugging and fixing purpose. This is about your throw keyword. Let me repeat the summary, guys. Throw is used to throw the exception explicitly, and main target of throw keyword is custom defined exception, but yes, you can use this for both API as well as for custom defined exceptions. And unchecked propagation is possible only with throw keyword. Just use the throw keyword and unchecked exception propagation you can obtain. Let us see Java throws keyword. Java throws keyword is used to declare an exception. It gives an information to the programmer that there may occur an exception, so it is better for the programmer to provide the exception handling code so that normal flow can be maintained. Exception handling is mainly used to handle the checked exceptions. If there occurs any unchecked exception, such as null pointer exception, arithmetic exception, etc., it is the programmer's fault that he is not performing checkup before coding is used. This is the syntax of this throw declaring the exception, guys. Return type of the method name, throws, then your exception class, and method code inside. Guys, I'm going to define 3 once again. Checked exceptions, either you handle or you have to declare the exceptions. But unchecked exceptions are mostly it is due to negligence of the developer or improper code developed by the developer. But of course, errors is not something you can handle it. It's irrecoverable stuff. You can't handle as a developer. So mostly all unchecked exceptions, if developer write the proper code, you can avoid all unchecked exceptions. Checked exceptions are something which we cannot handle. They are very serious exceptions, and compiler itself forces you to handle that, otherwise developer can't even take the build. Let us see this, guys. Let me create one more class. Void validate age. Void validate age. Let me declare this as static because I don't want to create the object. int age. I'm wrapping this code inside of a try block surrounding with try catch. I'm just writing the same code as we have written earlier, guys. If age is less than 80, throw new arithmetic exception, else eligible for vote. Eligible for vote. Guys, if you see here, I'm calling the validate age by passing 12, and it will take 12 and you are comparing with 18. If age is less than 18, then you are explicitly throwing new arithmetic exception, correct? But if you want to throw some checked exceptions, let us suppose, let me throw IO exception. This is one of the checked exception. Then it is throwing the error. What is that error is? Whenever you're throwing, see, whenever there is a piece of code which will throw the checked exception, or when you are throwing the exception explicitly, you need to put it. You need to handle it by using try catch or at least declare the exception. This is what we are discussing about the throws keyword. Throws keyword is used to declare the exceptions, but declaring the exception is optional for unchecked exceptions. Guys, if you remember in earlier example, we didn't declare the exception. Just you took the age, and if age is less than 18, throw new arithmetic exception. But here, when you're throwing the new IO exception, it is forcing you to either handle it using try catch or declare the exception. Why is that? Because checked exceptions are very serious exceptions, and whether you need to handle it or declare the exceptions. But in earlier case, we didn't declare the exceptions. It doesn't mean that we cannot declare the exceptions. Yes, you can. Always better one is, and even in earlier case also, is arithmetic, and or you can declare this better idea is always, if you don't handle the exceptions in your code, at least declare the exceptions. Declaration meaning that, hey, my method may throw these exceptions, and caller, as a caller, you have to handle it, so that at least caller will handle it, and they will make sure that their code will not break it, their application will not break it. Guys, let me repeat. Throws keyword is used to declare the exceptions, but be remember, declaring unchecked exception is optional. If you don't declare also, it will be okay, but declaring checked exception is mandatory if you do not handle. In case of checked exceptions, you have only two choices. One, either you handle it by wrapping the code inside of try catch block, or at least declare the exceptions. This is the code, guys, and I'm passing integer. Let me put some remaining code here. Systout rest of the code. I'm going to execute the program. Since you are handling this IO exception, the rest of the code will be executed smoothly. Guys, I hope you are clear now about how to declare the exception and throws keyword. Let us see the exception propagation. Earlier we discussed the unchecked exception propagation, right? let us see the checked exception propagation. The flow is same, it will not differ, but anyhow, see here I am going to throw IO exception instead of arithmetic exception. Since it is checked exception, you have only two choices: either handle it in try-catch using try-catch, or declare the exception. See this? I am declaring the exception. So this guys, look at this. Void m1 int age throws IO exception. If age is less than 18, throw new IO exception. Else, as usual, continue. So, which means whenever exception occurred in this method, it will pass that exception object to the caller. Who is the caller of m1? M2. Here m2 has again two choices: either again handle this. If this handles this using try catch, then everything will be smooth. M3 no need to worry, and main method no need to worry. If you don't handle it, at least declare the exception. Then M2 is safe, because M2 is not handling the exception, but it is declaring the exception. Now it is turned to M3. M3 is calling M2, but M2 is passing that exception object. Here again this has the choice: either declare the exception or handle the exception. This is also declaring the exception. Then obviously that exception object will be passed to the main method. Now here we are handling this. This is known as exception propagation. Checked exception propagation, guys. Hope you are clear. Let me repeat once again. M1 is taking the age, it is validating the age. If age is less than 18, it will throw the new IO exception, which is checked exception. Since it is throwing the checked exception, you need to declare that exception. Guys, whenever you define the method inside which has the code to throw the checked exceptions, it may be IO, SQL exception, class not found exception, file not found exception, etc. Whether you handle it or at least declare. If you handle it, it will be pure code. Then caller will no need to worry about anything. They can happily call your method and use the logic. But if you declare, at least they will come to know what type of exceptions your method may throw, so that caller will take care. But in this case, M2 is calling M1, but M2 is not handling the exception, it is also declaring. Which means M1 is passing the exception object to M2, M2 is passing the exception object to M3, and M3 is again passing the object to main method. In main method we are handling the exception, then it will go through smooth. This is checked exception propagation. Guys, if you see unchecked exception and checked exception propagation, you can identify one main difference. That is, unchecked exception propagation is possible only using throw keyword, but checked exceptions you have to use throw and throws together. And one more thing is, you can declare multiple exceptions. Like throws IO exception, comma arithmetic exception, comma null pointer exception. But whenever you are throwing, you can throw only one object class. That means throw new IO exception, throw no SQL exception, etc. This is the one of the difference between throw and throws keyword. Okay, let us see what precautions we need to take care while overriding the methods. Guys, let me delete this stuff. This is the topic we are going to discuss: exception handling with respect to method overriding. Let me define the classes, guys. So I have a class A void M. I have class B extends A. Guys, I'm not writing any code inside of my method because I'm not worrying about the implementation part. Override these are my main classes, guys. Class type is already okay. Let me call it as A1. Oh, this doesn't exist. And this is the structure, guys. I have class A1 wherein I have the method void M, and I have class B extends A1, means B is a subclass and A1 is a superclass. I am overriding one method called M1. Now the question is, if this method doesn't declare the exception, see this, it is not declaring any exception, right? Then what about overriding method? Overriding method can declare the exception? If yes, what type of exceptions it can declare? One point is, guys, as is you can define always, which means superclass method doesn't declare any exception, then subclass method also you can define without declaring the exception. That is the first point. And second point is, let me declare here arithmetic exception. Yeah, quite. So when superclass method doesn't declare any exception, then subclass overridden method can declare unchecked exception. Let me declare checked exception, guys. No, it's not allowing. See this? Exception, IO exception is not compatible with throws class. So which means whenever superclass method is not declaring any of the exceptions, then subclass overridden method can be defined as is, which means without declaration, or if you want to declare, you can declare unchecked exception. That is point number one, guys. See this? If the superclass method doesn't declare an exception, subclass overridden method cannot declare the checked exceptions but can declare unchecked exception. And let me declare here throws runtime exception. Superclass method, now it is declaring the exception. So what are all we can do with overriding method? I can declare as is whatever the exception declared by a M method in superclass, overridden method can declare the same exception. Overridden method can be declared without declaring any exception, or declare using subclass exception. Guys, let me repeat. If superclass method declares one exception, then subclass method can declare the same exception or subclass exception, or without declaring any exception you can define, but you cannot declare the superclass. See this? It is throwing the error. This is the second point. If the superclass method declares an exception, subclass overridden method can declare same subclass exception or no exception, but cannot declare parent exception. Let us move on to custom defined exceptions, guys. Let me take the same method as we have taken earlier. See, I'm going back to arithmetic exception. I'm not declaring any exception. This is the one, guys, which I have seen earlier. Guys, I have a method where I'm passing one argument integer. We are checking the age. If age is less than 18, you're explicitly throwing new arithmetic exception. But what I want is, I'm not satisfying with API depend exceptions. I want my own exception class. What should I do? What should I do? I want to throw my own exception, that is known as user defined exceptions or custom exceptions. How can we define those custom or user defined exceptions? Guys, here also two types, just like your unchecked and checked exceptions. You decide what you want, whether you want custom defined unchecked exception or custom defined checked exception. First I will show you custom defined unchecked exceptions. Custom unchecked exception. Define one class, and this class has to extend runtime exception. Why am I deriving it from runtime exception? Is very simple, guys. If you see the hierarchy, guys, if we see null pointer exception, arithmetic exception, number format exception, all these exceptions are derived from runtime exception. All these are runtime exceptions or unchecked exceptions. All unchecked exceptions are subclasses of runtime exception. So I am also going to define my own exception by extending the runtime exception class. And what I'm going to do is, I will define the constructor here and I will call the superclass constructor. I will throw the exception. Throw custom defined exception. I will pass the message here, my own exception, and just I'm passing one string, guys, and here string is, I'm passing the string. Why is this? If age is less than 18, throw new custom defined exception, my own exception, remove argument to match exception. Sorry, guys. Then I'm defining constructor. Which can accept the string. That's all, guys. That's all how you define your custom defined unchecked exceptions. See this? Instead of arithmetic exception, I want to define my own customized exception with my own message. So what should I do is, I can define one class which extends from runtime exception. Why we are extending runtime exception? Because all unchecked exceptions are derived from runtime exception. And define one constructor and if you pass this string, this string will be passed to super class, that is runtime exception. That's all guys. Your custom defined runtime exception or unchecked exception is ready. Now let me execute this. See guys, instead of you see arithmetic and blah blah blah, now you can see your own defined exception, that is custom checked exception. Message is my own exception. How to define the checked exceptions? I want to define my compile or checked exception, checked customized exception, that is user defined checked exception. How to do? See, all these SQL exception, IO exception and so on except runtime exception are checked exceptions, which are all derived from exception class. Means all checked exceptions are subclasses of exception class. So if you want to define your own checked exception, then just derive from this. I'm just changing it to checked exception, custom defined checked exception. I will do it. That's all guys. Custom defined checked exception, add throws. See, since it is custom defined exception, like earlier when we are throwing the IO exception, that is the checked exception, and since you are not handling, you are declaring exception, right? The same way you need to handle, you need to declare the exception here if you are not handling. So I am declaring the exception. So let me execute guys. See, rest of the code where it is going custom checked exception, my own exception. So like this you can define user defined custom exceptions, user defined unchecked exceptions. Both you can define guys. That's all for this session. Let me recap guys. Let me recap what did we discuss. We discussed throw keyword. Throw keyword is used to declare, throw keyword is used to throw the exception explicitly. And we discussed throws keyword. Throws keyword is used to declare the exceptions. Mainly declaring exception is mandatory for checked exceptions, but for unchecked exceptions it is an optional. And we saw the unchecked exception propagation or exception chaining, and checked exception propagation and checked exception chaining. Means unchecked exception propagation is possible only only by using the throw keyword, but when you go for checked exception propagation you have to use both the keywords together, that is throw and throws. And we saw what precautions we need to take care while overriding the methods in subclass. What are those? If superclass is not declared, superclass method is not declaring the method, subclass method can be defined as is, or it can throw the unchecked exception. If superclass method is declaring the exception, then overridden method can be defined as is with same exception. It can throw the subclass exception. It can be defined without exception, but it cannot declare the checked exceptions. And we saw how to define custom defined exceptions, that is both checked and unchecked exceptions. If you want to define the unchecked custom defined exceptions, then you need to define the class by extending exception class. If you want to define custom defined unchecked exception, you need to define the class by extending runtime exception class. That's all guys for this session. Thanks for watching this video. Please subscribe to my channel and please share these videos with your friends. Thank you so much.